All right, it is time for a book list. A list of books. Who doesn't love that? Hey everyone, it is Shannon, and I'm super excited to be here today and to share with you this list of the longest books that I have ever read. I'm really excited to share this. It was fun to look up this list, and it's also amazing that on Goodreads it takes no time at all to just sort of click a few things and sort a few things, and there you go. There is your list of the longest books that you've read, or the shortest books that you read, or the most recent books that you read, or the longest books you haven't read. That would be a whole other list. But today I'm going to be talking about the longest books that I have read. So I have selected the top 17, and I didn't pick that as the number. I actually went with the page count as the number. So I'm going with any books that are 700 pages or more, and I'm going to go from the shortest of the longest to the longest of the longest. And I just had a lot of fun putting this together. I am very achievement oriented. I do like to take on reading challenges and book challenges. I like to read things that are challenging to read. Not everything I like to read is something that I want to be challenging, but the sense of accomplishment that comes with finishing a long book or a challenging book or even just a really, really engaging read is just really wonderful. And a couple of years ago, I did make the active decision to intentionally take on one or two long books a year. And so this list has grown over those years up to 17 titles. Now, before we get to the actually read titles, I do have one DNF that is included. I don't normally include DNFs in read books, but this one I actually read a third of it, and with its 1,400 page count, that is like 450 pages. So I included it as read because I know I'm never going to go back to it, even though it was a DNF. So I'm just going to mention that to the start, and then I will get to the ones that I have actually read, because even the read page count of this one is quite high, and that would actually be Stephen King's The Stand. I really gave this a try. I'm just not really a fan of survivalist fiction, but I did actively read this for, I think, a month or maybe two, and then I finally decided to let it go. It just wasn't for me. I do read other works by Stephen King, but this one just wasn't a good fit. So that is my one DNF on the list. So now to the actual read books, and we're going to start with, and I went to 700 pages simply so I could include this particular title because it is quite a challenge, and it's one of my more recent ones, and that is Moby Dick by Herman Melville. This version is 707 pages. It is a classic. It took me 5 weeks of very active, engaged reading to read this. I think I read a chapter a day, at least a chapter a day for the entirety, once I started. And I read it in most of May 2019, but I finished it in June. And I still remember I was like, oh, I just wish I had finished it. I didn't actually love it. All of the whaling stuff was quite disturbing. I did really like a lot of the narrative, because this has a lot of stuff about whaling, but I really did like the narrative, and I have come to read some a graphic novel. There's a French graphic novel that was based on this that was like 200 pages. There's also a Classics Illustrated, which I quite enjoyed, that was based on this. I like reading Classics Illustrated, which are comics. If you're unfamiliar, they're comics, like 50 pages, and I like reading them after I read classics, just to get the sort of through line, or what the most notable things or what the most known things are, because often I read books like this because they are such a part of culture and society, they have an impact. So but when I read it, I don't always glean what that is, but then when you read something like Classics Illustrated, all of a sudden it becomes clear. So maybe I should read those first, but I won't. I always go to the source first, so because that is just my way. So that is the shortest of the longest that I've read. And then the next two are part of a series, and they're bind-ups. So this is a bit weird, but it's true. I read them in bind-ups. So this is go from one end of things to the other. So older text to newer text, different age groups, different subject matters. So this is Night World. I read volumes 1 through 3 as well as 7 through 9. These are bind-ups of YA paranormal romances, and each of them has 3 books in them. They are 729 pages and 732 pages each, so they are, sizable works. And this is one series that has not finished. books 1 through 9 came out a long time, like, I can't remember. I read these back in 2010, and the 10th book has never come out. And every once in a while I check on it because it's on my list of series I've started, and lo and behold, still has not been released. So one day, Night World, Volume 10, will be released, and I won't remember anything about the other stories. I do remember reading them and enjoying them, and back in 2010, which is when my reading picked up. It's one of the, I think, 3 times that I really got back into reading, so I did really enjoy them at the time. So, Night World. Next up, still in the land of YA, The City of Heavenly Fire by Cassandra Clare. This is the 6th and final book in the Mortal Instruments series. I buddy read this with my buddy Di. Hi, Di! And we read this back in 2019. I read it within a month because we were buddy reading it, and did we read it in a month or a week? Was it a month or a week? Oh, I wrote down a month, but we usually read them in 10 days. This one was long. Well, I'm not entirely sure, but it was between 2 weeks and a month, and 733 pages, YA urban fantasy, completed a series. There is more books in this world. There is a new series. We also read The Infernal Devices, which were a prequel, but this is the only one that made this list. I was actually really surprised that it was this long, but 733 pages, that is a long one. More in the land of YA urban fantasy. Breaking Dawn by Stephenie Meyer. This is the 4th book in the Twilight saga. It is 756 pages long. I've actually read this multiple times. I read this before I was on Goodreads, and then I reread it in 2011, and I reread it again this year. So I have read this 750 page work 3 times. Oh my gosh. And it usually takes me about a month. This time it took me about a month. So, because I reread the whole series backwards this year. With Olivia Savannah from Olivia's Catastrophe, read them backwards, and she said that other people could join in, and I did. So that is that. And I went all the way back, and then also read Midnight Sun, which didn't make the list, but was close at 658 pages. All right, next up, more actual, I never know, people always call these kids, I'm not sure if I consider them kids, and, I picked up the wrong one, my goodness gracious. Well, this will just have to be a placeholder. So, it's not this particular edition, but this was the largest one on my shelf, but Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix. So, the 5th book of the Harry Potter series, this is the 4th, The Goblet of Fire, but the 5th one is 766 pages. I read it, I think when it was released or before the movie. I'm not sure. Again, I read it before Goodreads, and then I reread it in 2010, and it took me a month to read. I feel that's so funny that I picked the wrong one. So, but I'm sure they look very similar. It's okay, right? It's okay. I hope it's okay. Okay, on to maybe the most challenging book that I read out of all of these books, and that is Le Mort d'Arthur by Sir Thomas Malory. So this is Arthurian Stories. I do have a physical edition of this, but it's tucked away in my storage area. It is 843 pages, and it took me a year and a half to read it. A year and a half. That wasn't always like reading it every day. Like I would read it. There were certain activities like when I was waiting for things or something, or when I was resting, that I decided to read it. And then at some point I did like actively go, okay, I'm going to work on finishing this. But I did read little bits of it as it goes. And it was it's probably one of the hardest books that I've ever read. I didn't understand a lot of it. It is just a real toughie. It really, really is. But it was a huge accomplishment for me to stick with it, to finish it even though I had started it so long ago, to recognize the fact that if I was going to try and understand every word in every situation, I would never make it through. So that was a sort of breaking point, like a breakthrough point in my reading, to acknowledge the fact that I may not understand everything, but I can still keep reading, and getting something from it is better than getting nothing from it. So it's one that I feel like I should try and reread at some point, but I don't know if I ever really want to take that on. I continue to read other Arthurian works from different authors, from different viewpoints, and I just really enjoy Arthurian stories. I do mostly, now that I've read quite a few, I think I do mostly enjoy them more in film, but I'm always drawn to read them. So this was a huge accomplishment, and I read that in 2016, and as I said, it really was a turning point for me to recognize that I could accomplish reading a really long book, and after that I did continue to work on that in a more active way. And I think this is my most recent long book that I read, and that's Dune by Frank Herbert, which I've actually reviewed. Oh my gosh, I will link that up above in the cards. And so this one's a bit weird though, because it's 892 pages, but the last 100 or so pages are appendices, so I didn't read them, but I still read like 792 pages, so its placement is a little bit different. This took me 4 months to read. It was actually much more enjoyable than I expected, although it was, there's a lot of characters, so it was a bit confusing. And I read it in 2019 and then finished it in 2020. So I think that's definitely my most recent finish. Next up, the only nonfiction on this list, and I was actually surprised to see a nonfiction book on this list, and that is 1001 Movies You Must See Before You Die by Stephen J. Schneider. Sorry, this is so heavy. My goodness gracious. So this one also, like Dune, is a bit of a cheat because, well, Dune isn't a cheat. It still is over 700 pages. But this one, I only read the entries for the films that I had watched. This book is 960 pages long. It took me a year to read it. At some point, I started it sort of with the idea of a project in mind, of watching the movies or reading them and then watching them or something like that. And then I finally decided I'm just going to read all the entries for the ones that I've seen, and I'm going to catalog all of the titles for the ones that I hadn't seen. So that's what I ended up doing. And as of the finishing this, I had seen 415 of the movies. I had a couple of DNFs, and I had not seen 575. So in a way, I've only read half of this book, but I did go through the entire thing, and lots of it is pictures, so there is that. So, what's that? What's that? The Searchers. Oh, I think that's one of my DNFs. Was that one of my DNFs? Was that the, oh no, I haven't seen that one. Or maybe I have. Oh my gosh. It has been some time since I have been like super dedicated to watching classics, but which these aren't all classics. Some of them are modern classics, some of them are Zeitgeist, and so I really did. That's a classic, Chinatown. I did not enjoy that. I did not enjoy that. I feel like I want a Taxi Driver, another classic. I often find a lot of the lists for these are very centered towards a male audience, I would say. Film has some work to catch up on that kind of stuff. Wow, this is so big. This is so big. I gotta put that one on the floor. So that's the only nonfiction on the list. And from here on in, we go into books that are over 1,000 pages long. And the first is A Clash of Kings, which is the second book in the Song of Ice and Fire series. It is 1,010 pages. I read it in 2018. This one took me 11 months to read. Again, I didn't actively read it like every day. I started it, and then I didn't come back to it. And then Riley from RM FicFac hosted a read-along for the books. And that got me back to reading it. So I ended up finishing it, as well as A Feast of Crows by George R.R. Martin. And this one's actually the fourth book in the Song of Ice and Fire series. So I read this in 6 weeks in 2018 as a part of that read-along as well. It was 1,061 pages. Now we come to the only book which I read before Goodreads. So this one has been out for quite some time. Well, some of these are old. Moby Dick is probably the oldest. Oh, no, it is not. It is not the oldest. But the one book that I knew I had read a long time ago. I read it when I was a teenager, and I knew it was a long one, and it was Stephen King's It. So this is a classic. Now I imagine, modern classic? I would call this a modern classic. modern classic? When does it, I don't know. I think all of that's a bit interpretive anyway, or subjective, but it's iconic. We can say that. Stephen King's It. I read this when I was a teenager, which was so not a good decision. And all of my family read it. All of my siblings read it. I think Jamie got it, and then it passed through all of us. It was the longest book that I had ever read. It was a huge accomplishment to finish it. It was so scary. I don't know why I read it. I don't know if I would ever reread it, but it was epic. Absolutely epic, and so scary. So scary. My goodness gracious. Getting to more current works again. We have more Song of Ice and Fire. So A Dance with Dragons by George R.R. Martin. This is the 5th book and most recent release, and it is 1,152 pages. This one took me 2 months to read, and I did eventually decide to speed read it. I wasn't enjoying the series. There were lots of things that I just didn't really like, so I really sped read the chapters that were from characters that I wasn't as invested in, and then I read the chapters for the characters that I was invested in. And that was also another turning point where I realized that for me, I am more likely to speed read a book to find out what happens and to sort of just pick and choose what I'm following, right? And then I'm more likely to speed read than to DNF, because at that point it was like, it was the year that the final season of Game of Thrones was being released on TV, and I just wanted to finish the series. Like, I just wanted, or get caught up, right? Because the next book was yet to be released, so I just wanted to finish. So I decided to speed read. And going along the same lines, A Storm of Swords by George R.R. Martin. This is the 3rd book in the Song of Ice and Fire series, and it is 1,172 pages. It took me 2 months to read as well. As a fun side note, oddly, the original, the first book, Game of Thrones, which is the only one I still have in physical edition, the rest I got rid of, but this one did not make the list because it is just shy of it. It is like 608. This version is 689 pages. What do we got here? 694 pages, so it just didn't make the 700-page cut. So anyway, so 4 of the 17 books were all from A Song of Ice and Fire. Fantasy, man. Fantasy. It really, really does. Oh my gosh, this book is so heavy. It really, I was trying to be subtle there. Fantasy books can be long, is what I was trying to say. So next up, we are getting into some really, really hefty works. So clocking in at 1,280 pages, and this is slightly a cheat, but not really, is the complete works of William Shakespeare. So I'm including, even though I didn't read everything in this particular edition, although if you can see all that, those are all index cards for my notes on each of the different plays. Because I wrote a line for each of the scenes, and then I did a family tree for each of the plays. So that is the Merry Wives of Windsor. For most of them, I think I started about 1/3 of the way in. So I'm including this because I actually have read every single thing within this book. I attempted to read all of Shakespeare for the first time back in 2011. That was a failed attempt. And then in 2015, I took it on again, and with the goal of reading all of the plays of Shakespeare, and it took me 4 years, but by the end of 2018, I actually did read all of the plays, including The Two Noble Kinsmen, which actually isn't in this because it's sort of like anonymous, co-written, kind of attributed, but who knows really. So I read all of the plays, and then this year, and at the end of last year and this year, I decided that I wanted to finish everything. So I read the sonnets and the narrative poems and everything that was at the end of this one. Well, not like the whatever that is, not the glossary. So I didn't read the glossary, but I don't include the glossary generally. So, but I read everything else at the end of this, and then I also read Edward II, which isn't in here, which is another one that's sort of like attributed to Shakespeare. So I'm considering this complete because I have read all of the plays and the poems and the sonnets. I have read everything that is in here. So, and that took overall 5 years. and 2 attempts. So it was a big achievement. Actually, the plays was the big achievement, and then when I realized I could read everything, I got excited about that. But now it's actually a little sad, because when there are like Shakespeare readathons or Shakespeare, like the Shakes Along, and I participated in the All the World's a page readathon, I was like, oh, but I have read all of Shakespeare, and I will reread it, and I definitely have favorites, right? Macbeth, Richard the Third, Henry the Fourth Part 1, Romeo and Juliet, The Winter's Tale, and King Lear are all some of my favorites of Shakespeare, and I just absolutely adore them. So, and I do reread them, but there was something, like the sense of accomplishment was huge, and then it was also kind of strange. So that was unexpected. And doing challenges does sometimes create unexpected results, because it's kind of like an experiment. You don't know where it's going to go, as is the case with my next read, which is a bit of a strange one in a lot of ways. Actually, it's a bit of a weird one. Can you guess what it could be? And that would be The Incomplete Works of H.P. Lovecraft, which is a bit of a bitter situation, because I wanted to learn about weird fiction, and like there's so much that's like classic horror that is connected to or from Lovecraft, and because his work is public domain, there's lots of films and other works that is inspired by like his works and stuff like that. But the bitter part is that I did not know when I started reading Lovecraft that he is pretty well known for being racist. It did start to come up in his work, and I was kind of like, that seems a bit weird. That seems a bit, oh, that's not even weird. That's really clear. That is extremely clear. So it's one of those situations where I now am not proud that I have read all of Lovecraft, and it's actually quite uncomfortable to say that one of my most read authors is Lovecraft. But he has had such an impact on the world of weird and horror and so many genres, and there's so much that's come out of it that it is, I don't know. So I feel complicated about this one for sure. And I did skip one. There was one title that, after there was a couple that felt problematic or racist, to be honest, I looked into one of them, and all of the reviews were like, this one is, so I decided not to read that one. But then there are ones that I really did truly enjoy, like The Quest for Aranon. That is one of my favorite stories ever. I enjoyed The Tomb, which is the first one that I read, and The Cats of Ulthur and From Beyond. Like there are certain things that come up into stories again and again and again, and after now that I've read 62 out of the 63, like you start to see patterns, but there is something so interesting and so different about a lot of the things that he wrote about, but there's also so many horrible things, and then once I had the context, it was like, oh, that is extremely uncomfortable. So yeah, so that one feels very, very, very strange, but it is not the longest title I've ever read. The version I had was 1,305 pages, and it took me 2.5 years to read all of the works of Lovecraft, or all of the fiction. But it is not the final one. The final one I have mentioned in videos before, so I'm curious as to if anyone has guessed what perhaps it could be. It is a classic. It is one that I enjoyed. It took me 6 months to read it, and a buddy read it with my friend Clara, and it is War and Peace by Leo Tolstoy. This was another one that was a huge achievement to finish, because I did actually cave finally, and although I loved this edition, it's really heavy, and even though it's quite densely packed, I did cave and I bought the exact same edition on Kindle. And I read most of it on Kindle. But I loved it. I absolutely loved it. This is one that it just made it all worth it. Like I think there were 2 epilogues, and And I didn't love every single moment. There was a couple of themes that I wasn't particularly fond of, but there were some beautiful moments in this, and there were really interesting characters, and I really got a lot from it. And buddy reading it definitely did help. And actually, if you may have noticed, several of these I have buddy read or read with read-alongs, and that definitely does help with some of the longer works or more challenging works. It gives you someone to talk to it with, and also a bit of a schedule to keep up with, and a bit of social pressure, not social, but you know what I mean, like a bit of encouragement, let's say encouragement to do so. But yeah, so this is the longest book that I have ever read, War and Peace. I do not know if anything will surpass this. I do have another really long read that I'm hoping to read this year. I read this in 2015 to 2016. I finished it in January 2016. And so that year I finished both this and Le Morte d'Arthur. And since then, I've really sort of decided to read one or two a year. And I really find like that it's been worth it. And sort of like, it's funny because like with the Song of Ice and Fire books, I didn't really enjoy them that much, so that gave me a lot of food for thought, because they do take a dedicated amount of time to read. And now I'm kind of like, I'm happy I read them. I'm happy I read them with the group that I read them with Riley and Michael and Andy, and I'm glad that I finished the series before the TV series final season. So it was well worth doing, but it made me think, wow, if a book is this long, I want to feel a bit more confident going into it. But then again, until you start reading it, you don't really know. And I do still have a sense of accomplishment from finishing all of these books, even though some of them I enjoyed and some of them I didn't, and some of them I didn't read all of, that nonfiction. But yeah, that one's a bit of a weird situation. So maybe it's 16 plus 1.5. I don't know. I'm still counting it. But yeah, there's not too many on my, that are on my radar that are longer. There are some that are in the upper end, but I don't know if there's any that are longer, but that would be a different video. Let me know if you would like to see that as well, the longest books that I would like to read. But so far, these are the longest books that I have actually read. Let me know what is the longest book that you have ever read. If you don't know, you can check on Goodreads. You just add the setting. You go to Read Books, go to settings, add page count, and then hit page count. Sometimes you have to hit it twice. Sometimes it'll give you the shortest book first. That's the same with everything. You can do the alphabet either way. And yeah, let me know your longest book read. If you would like to do a video like this, feel free to do so. And let me know that you did, because I would love to see what the longest books that you have read are. So close. What was that last sentence? I am not quite sure. So there you go. There are the 17 plus 1 longest books that I have ever read as of right now. And hopefully more will be added in the future. Thank you so much for watching. More will be read in the future, not just added. More will be read in the future. Okay, thank you so much for watching.